Directed by David Fincher and released in 1992, Alien 3 is widely looked upon as the moment the Alien franchise took a sharp downturn in quality. Unlike the previous two films, which were masterful executions of their directors' respective visions, Alien 3 was a movie that, from the very beginning, was hampered by conflicting visions. By the end of its production, Alien 3 had burned through $60 million, 10 writers, 5 scripts, 2 directors, and managed to anger just about everyone who worked on it.
It's amazing to me that Fox is the #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
I would highly recommend reading the full story of Alien 3's production because it is a fascinating look into what happens when the creative process is hindered by so many conflicting voices. It is also well known that the movie has been repeatedly disavowed by its director and lambasted by several of the actors that have worked in this franchise.
The third one for me was just weird. I didn't root for anybody in that picture. I don't think the time was taken to find somebody to really, really root for.
The third one was so nihilistic. I mean, that word really fits it. It's like it has so many negatives going for it.
But, in spite of all the controversy, Alien 3 is a movie that I can't help but be fascinated by. It is neither a masterpiece like the original Alien, nor is it a hilarious disaster like Alien Resurrection. It is truly the black sheep of the Alien franchise. It is a movie with a distinct directorial vision scrambled by producers. A 5-star meal run through a blender. Funnily enough, I originally started writing this video with a much different tone to it, as I had only seen the theatrical cut of Alien 3 at that point. But now having seen the assembly cut, my perspective on Alien 3 has changed significantly. So in this video, I will be going into detail on the aspects I enjoy about Alien 3, while also exploring why this movie is so controversial and how its vision could have been better realized. So with that, here are my thoughts. From the opening credits of Alien 3, the dark and oppressive tone is immediately established. The Fox logo appears, but instead of hearing the normal fanfare, we get This is one of my all-time favorite movie openings because it is so simple and effective. The alteration of the normal fanfare unsettles the audience, while also foreshadowing that something terrible is about to happen. As the opening credits roll, we get what is easily the most controversial element of this movie, that being the deaths of Newt and Hicks. This is what is often pointed to as the moment that ruins the movie and is often accused of ruining the triumphant ending of Aliens.
Where are the others?
They didn't make it.
What?
They didn't survive.
But in my opinion, killing off Newt and Hicks is not a bad idea in and of itself. The Alien universe has always been a dark and brutal world in which no character is ever truly safe. It certainly fits within Ripley's arc of constantly dealing with the loss of those around her and being pursued by the alien no matter where she goes. The unexpected death of a beloved character can often be an effective way to establish a serious tone and to get the audience emotionally invested in a story. Probably the best example of this technique being done well is going from the triumphant ending of Thor Ragnarok to the brutal beginning of Avengers Infinity War. Killing off Heimdall and Loki at the beginning of Infinity War was a very effective way to establish Thanos as a villain and make it clear to the audience that this movie would be significantly darker than the previous Marvel movies. But while I think that Alien 3 killing off Newton Hicks is not an inherently bad idea, the problem lies in its execution. Because unlike with Infinity War, the characters in Alien 3 never get a chance to fight back or interact with Ripley before they are killed off. And Ripley doesn't even get to witness Hicks and Newt's deaths, she is just told about it afterwards. As such, their deaths feel very unceremonious and less emotional than they could have been. Had the movie opened with Ripley having a meaningful interaction with Newt and Hicks before they were killed, I think this would have been received a lot better. As it stands, the deaths of Newt and Hicks don't bug me as much as it does other people, but I also completely understand why so many people take issue with this decision. It is bold and dark and risky, and sometimes those risks don't always pay off.
For within each seed, there is a promise of a flower.
In terms of its atmosphere, tone, and themes, Alien 3 is easily the darkest of the original 4 Alien films. It opens with most of the main cast dying, it takes place on a planet filled with violent criminals, and is also the goriest of the 4 movies. Supposedly, the original cut of Alien 3 was 3 hours long and had to be cut down for fear of exceeding the limits of an R rating. For many viewers, this will likely be off-putting, but for me, this dark atmosphere lends Alien 3 a unique quality that distinguishes it from the other films in the franchise. Most of the subsequent Alien films try to replicate either the horror of the first Alien or the action of Aliens. But Alien 3 is unique in that it returns to the horror elements of Alien, but is also very contemplative and philosophical. In particular, the religious angle to Alien 3 I find very intriguing, as Christian symbolism and themes are used throughout the movie. I will be going into more depth on these elements in a future video, but suffice it to say, Alien 3 is actually a lot deeper than people often give it credit for. This tone is also elevated by Elliot Goldenthal's score, which, while not as memorable as the scores for the first 2 movies, does a great job of emphasizing the dark, ethereal atmosphere. There is a lot of choir and melodic symphony used in the score, which ties in perfectly with the religious themes of the movie. And these themes would not be able to be accomplished without the characters.
Take off. I gotta re-educate some of the brothers. We've gotta discuss some matters of the spirit.
Unlike Alien, which followed a crew of civilians, and Aliens, which followed a crew of Marines, Alien 3 follows a group of prisoners trapped on an abandoned mining colony. I really appreciate the fact that this movie didn't take the easy route of copying its predecessors, and instead opted for a different cast of characters to face off against the Xenomorph. And having Ripley being surrounded by people who have committed such heinous crimes enhances both the fear factor and makes the movie's message of redemption that much more powerful. Of the new characters introduced in this movie, Dr. Clemens is easily my favorite. On top of being played by the brilliant Charles Dance, Clemens stands out because of his warmness towards Ripley, in contrast with the coldness he is shown by all the other characters. His backstory also ties in with the movie's theme of redemption, being a doctor who bears the guilt of killing 11 people due to his negligence in the past. Though here, I have to give another point of criticism, as I think that Clemens is killed off way too early in the story. I think that his death makes sense for the theme of loss the movie is going for, but I think he should have played a greater role in actually hunting down and fighting the Xenomorph. This would have added more emotional stakes, especially after he and Ripley become romantically involved. As it stands, his death isn't really mentioned by Ripley or any of the other characters after it happens, which makes it feel less impactful. It doesn't change the fact that his character is so good, but I wish he would have been used more. The second best of the new characters would have to be Dylan, played by Charles S. Dutton. Dylan's harshness makes him a great foil to Ripley in the beginning of the movie, and it is great to see him grow to appreciate and respect her as the movie progresses. He is a very layered character, given that he is simultaneously the religious leader of his community and someone who has committed heinous acts in the past. Like Clemens, Dylan's story as a hardened criminal ties in with the theme of redemption that the movie is going for. He also gives two fantastic speeches, one at the beginning of the movie and one at the end of the movie, that simultaneously deepen his character and hammer home the themes of the story so effectively. As for the other characters, I do have to say that they start to bleed together for me at a certain point. While the rest of the characters aren't bad, they don't have unique enough looks or personalities to really stand out or make much of an impact. In this regard, the movie feels like a step down from Aliens, which had such a memorable ensemble of characters. And it should probably go without saying, but Sigourney Weaver is just as good as Ripley in this movie as she was in the first two films. This is probably the most emotional range that she exhibits out of all the movies, and her performance really helps to make the viewer feel for Ripley as she goes through so many terrible struggles. But as always with this franchise, it is the alien itself that steals the show. In returning to the horror roots of Alien, Alien 3 makes it a point to focus on the terror of the xenomorph itself. The birth of the xenomorph, intercut with Dylan's eulogy about death giving way to new life, is such a beautiful and memorable scene because of its double meaning. And as stated earlier, this is easily the goriest of the original Alien movies, which I think works to this movie's benefit. After raising the bar by introducing hordes of xenomorphs and aliens, going back to one alien can only work if you put a lot of emphasis on the savagery of it. Also, this shot is probably the most iconic thing to come out of this movie, and for good reason. It's intense and shows off both Sigourney Weaver's acting and the terrifying beauty of the alien. And the fact that none of the prisoners have any conventional weapons to fight back with helps to raise the stakes and references back to the situation the crew of the Nostromo found themselves in. Unfortunately, the presence of the xenomorph is very much diminished by some of the poorly aged puppetry and green screen work. Unlike Alien and Aliens, whose effects still hold up incredibly well to this day, many of Alien 3's effects feel rushed and unfinished, likely because of the ramshackle nature of the film's production. And these POV shots of the alien running through the halls are cool at first, but start to wear thin the longer they go on. They ironically have the opposite effect of what they are intended to do, as they make the alien feel less threatening the more times you see the prisoners outrun and outmaneuver it. As such, the alien still has its moments in this movie that are effective, but it unfortunately falls short of the immaculate tension building that the previous films had. While I have given several criticisms of Alien 3 so far, I think that the movie's ending elevates the whole experience. This is the first movie in the series that doesn't copy the fourth act twist from the first Alien, and instead of blowing the xenomorph out the airlock again, Dylan sacrifices himself to lure the alien into a ravine where it is drowned in molten lead. Then after it jumps out, Ripley douses it in cold water, and the resulting temperature difference kills the creature. I have to give this movie credit for resolving its conflict in a different way from the previous films, and in a way that is also visually interesting. It's simultaneously awesome and hilarious to see a xenomorph explode like that. Ripley is then approached by a character referred to in the credits as Bishop 2, who offers to remove the alien that Ripley was infected with at the beginning of the film. It is deliberately left ambiguous as to whether or not this truly is Bishop's creator like he claims to be, or if it is another android. Personally, I do think it is Bishop's creator because after he is struck, we see red blood coming out of his ear. But regardless, it is clear that this is a deliberate attempt to emotionally manipulate Ripley into giving Weyland-Yutani the alien queen. But, in spite of her care for Bishop and her desire for a long life, Ripley sees through the ploy and refuses the offer, choosing instead to throw herself into the furnace, sacrificing herself to kill the last of the xenomorphs. While many fans were angry at the decision to kill off Ripley, her dying in order to destroy the xenomorphs once and for all feels like an appropriate ending to her character. She's been hunted by these creatures for years now, and her throwing herself into a fire as one last screw you to the aliens feels perfectly in character for her. This also ties in with the movie's religious themes of loss and self-sacrifice. And the replaying of Ripley's final message at the end of the first Alien is a nice touch in sending off the character. Unfortunately, this ending is undone in some ways by the events of Alien Resurrection, but even still, I think that the ending of Alien 3 does a lot in terms of ending the story of Ellen Ripley in a satisfying way.
Amen.
Amen.
Overall, in spite of its many flaws, Alien 3 is a movie that I enjoy for everything it does right. I respect the fact that it doesn't retread the previous movies and takes risks, even if some of those risks don't quite pay off. I love the dark atmosphere, the unique cast of characters, and the emotionally compelling journey that Ripley goes on. It is a thematically and symbolically rich movie that I can't help but be drawn in by, and I'm eager to discuss it in even greater depth. However, the film is ultimately held back from being as good as the first two movies due to some of its story decisions, weaker tension, and at times iffy effects. And for this review, this is one of the rare occasions in which I will be giving 2 ratings. Because if we're talking about the theatrical cut of Alien 3, I'd give it 2 out of 5 stars. But if we're talking about the assembly cut, I'd give it 3 out of 5 stars. Still not a masterpiece, but a significant improvement nonetheless. And while Alien 3 seemed like a definitive ending to the series with the death of Ripley, the possibility for greater profits ultimately drove the studio to bring her back, and the result was...
You are a beautiful, beautiful butterfly.
certainly something. So stick around for next time as I talk about the infamous Alien Resurrection. I hope you all have enjoyed this video. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and let me know your own thoughts on Alien 3, be they positive or negative. This is a very contentious film, so I'm very curious to see what your thoughts will be. As always, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.